Welcome to Area Fellowships. It is good for us to be together. Thank you for coming together and host. We're so grateful for you. We love you, and we're grateful that you open up your homes to us. Let's move now back to baptism. Now, if you remember from our time for teachings together, I've challenged our church to become intimately familiar with two passages of Scripture. Do you know what they are? One is the story of Zacchaeus in Luke 19. The other is the story of the Ethiopian in Acts chapter 8. Now, both of these stories are helpful in our witness and what our witness might look like. And I hope you're becoming ever more familiar with these two stories. But today, we're going to consider again the story of the Ethiopian in Acts chapter 8, because it fits so well with our previous video on baptism. And as we work down through the text, note the work of the Spirit in the lives of these men, and note the importance of baptism at the end of the text. Now, the narrative begins this way in Acts 8:26. An angel of the Lord spoke to Philip, saying, "Get up and go south to the road that descends from Jerusalem to Gaza." This is a desert road. Now, you'll notice in this, Philip wasn't too busy to follow the Lord. Philip didn't presume that he knew where to go. He didn't expect that he knew what the Lord was going to do. In these moments, he trusted the Spirit to guide his step. What a perfect example for us in our witness. Now, continue with me in verse 27. And so Philip got up and he went. He was obedient to the Lord. He was obedient in this way. And as he got up and went, there was an Ethiopian eunuch, a court official of Candace, queen of the Ethiopians, who was in charge of all of her treasure. And he had come to Jerusalem to worship. And he was returning and sitting in his chariot and reading the prophet Isaiah. Now, none of this makes any sense from a human perspective. An Ethiopian and Philip, a wealthy Ethiopian, one who's a eunuch in the royal court. And here's his chariot coming across the same path as Philip. God was setting this up. God had been setting this meeting up since time began. God had been working on the Ethiopian's heart. You see, that man he knew of God. He was reading from Isaiah, but he wasn't yet saved. And God was going to use Philip to bring this man to Jesus Christ. See, you need to be aware that God is working on the hearts of people we don't suspect all the time. So don't assume that you know who God's working on around you. Don't assume that God isn't working around you, because he is. There's people around you contemplating the Lord this day. God's working on their hearts. And God very well may use you to introduce them to the gospel. You see, as this continues in verse 29, the Spirit says to Philip, "Go, join his chariot." And Philip ran up and heard him reading Isaiah the prophet, and he said, "Do you understand what you're reading?" Now, look at Philip's move here. It's the perfect move, because he sees this Ethiopian. He hears him reading from the Scriptures, reading Isaiah, and he naturally assumes that God must want them to meet. God still gives these kinds of opportunities. I hope we are near enough to the Lord for our eyes to be open to exactly what God has in store for us, for who God has in store for us. How many times has God presented these opportunities to us, but we were too busy to be bothered? In verse 31, the text continues. And he said, Ethiopian is responding to Philip's question, "Do you understand?" And the Ethiopian says, "Well, how could I, unless someone guides me?" And he invited Philip to come up and sit with him. And the passage of Scripture that he was reading was this: "He was led as a sheep to slaughter, and as a lamb before its shearer is silent, so he does not open his mouth. In humiliation, his judgment was taken away. Who will relate his generation? For his life is removed from the earth." And the eunuch answered Philip and said, "Please tell me, of whom does this prophet say this? Of himself or someone else?" Philip opened his mouth, and beginning from this scripture, he preached Jesus to him. You see, this is it. When Philip opened his mouth, when Philip met the Ethiopian, they got to Jesus Christ. Sometimes we forget that the most important thing that we can do for someone is to introduce them to Jesus Christ. Forget everything else. If we can point them to Christ from wherever they are at the moment, we will do well. And thankfully, that's all you have to do. Just walk them from their current concern to Jesus, from Isaiah to Jesus, or whatever they're dealing with to Jesus. And He will meet them at their need every time. You don't have to meet their needs. You don't have to answer all their questions. All you have to do is to introduce them to the Christ. He will meet their needs, and He will provide every answer necessary. Now, as we come to the end of this text, Philip has preached Christ, and the text culminates in baptism. As they went along the road, they came to some water. And look at this. As the eunuch saw the water, this is what he said. "Look, water, what prevents me from being baptized?" And Philip said, "If you believe with all your heart, you may." And he answered, "I believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God." And he ordered the chariot to stop, and they both went down into the water, Philip as well as the eunuch, and he baptized him. When they came up out of the water, the Spirit of the Lord snatched Philip away, and the eunuch no longer saw him, but went on his way rejoicing. When Philip shared the gospel, he shared about baptism. He must have. Even in the text just before the Ethiopian narrative, Philip is in Samaria. He's sharing the gospel. And it says many in the crowds, men and women alike, were coming to be baptized. And just the same now as he shares the gospel with the Ethiopian sees water and he wants to be baptized. All of these people were led to baptism as Philip shared the gospel with them. It was a part of the conversation. And it was the perfect step of obedience unto Christ. The Ethiopian saw it. Philip saw it. The Ethiopian couldn't wait to be baptized. And Philip couldn't wait to do it. Now, may we have many like this Ethiopian come across our paths to be led to the Lord and into the waters of baptism. Take some time now together and discuss this text. Discuss the Spirit of the Lord. Discuss our witness, our baptism. But there are three specific questions we'll hope you'll answer together to close.